Defying portrait retouching techniques. When it comes to retouching a portrait, it can be a challenge to remove blemishes, wrinkles, and other facial discrepancies that come with age. In this course, we'll cover a variety of methods and techniques in Photoshop that will allow you to turn back the clock to present a more youthful appearance to a portrait. We'll begin removing major blemishes and wrinkles on the face, and along the way we'll discuss the degree to which some wrinkles remain visible, in addition to maintaining texture to the skin when softening it. We'll also tackle a matter of clearing up gray facial hair, red blotchiness of the skin, and reducing hot spots on the face. After watching this course, you'll be able to implement the various techniques and methods we use on your own portrait retouching projects. So without further ado, we'll begin in our next lesson. Be working with throughout the duration of this course. It's basically a photo of an older gentleman. I would say he's probably early to mid 50s in age. And what we're going to be doing is turning back time and peeling away several years from his face to make him appear as if he's in his late 30s, perhaps approaching 40. Now, I do believe that there's a certain threshold that you really don't want to cross over when it comes to doing something like this. For example, I wouldn't want to take this photo of this man here and try to make him appear as if he's a teenager. It just wouldn't come out very well. So keep that into account. Ultimately, you want to put into consideration what does your client want and what's really appropriate for them. So would you really need to go back as far as 10 or 15 years as far as retouching an image like this? Perhaps not, but we're going to try and push it to that level just so we can show you all the different things that we can achieve here as we retouch and edit this photo. So really quick, have a look at our layers panel. Here you can see the original image layer right there. And then I've got a group that I've created entitled Retouching. All of our layers, everything we do will be within this group. So while we're here, let's go ahead and come down here and click on this button and create a new layer. And we're going to start off by focusing on some of these major blemishes that we can kind of see here as we navigate around the skin. Some of these little sunspots, just these different little bumps, as well as some rogue hairs. He's got a rather long eyebrow hair kind of curling up right there, and looks like we have some hair just kind of right there on the forehead. So we're going to be using the healing brush tool over here in our tool panel. Over the next several lessons, we'll be relying on that pretty heavily. Now, before we use this tool, come up here to the top of the interface, up here in your control panel. Look where it says sample. Go ahead and switch that from current layer to all layers. That way, when we are sampling pixels, we're able to sample from all of the layers beneath whatever layer we're currently on. And then let's go ahead and right-click, and it'll bring up our little dialog box here with some of the settings we can change for our tool. I'm going to go ahead and take down the hardness to about, I'd say about 75%. That way it's just a little bit softer. Let's go ahead and zoom in here. So I'm going to kind of start with this little guy right here, that little bump. I'm going to hold down Alt and sample some skin right here that I like, and basically just heal that, painting right over it. So if you've kind of dabbled with some of these healing tools over here, you're probably wondering, well, what's the difference between the healing brush tool and, say, the clone stamp? Well, the healing brush tool is really useful because it puts into account the highlights and the shadows of whatever you're painting. And it only paints the color of your sampling area. Whereas the clone stamp is just going to flat out copy over, clone over whatever information you have to the area that you're trying to clone over. So it's not going to put any of that into account. So the healing brush tool, I really wouldn't try to use it on areas where you have a really sharp or defined edge. Whereas with the clone stamp, that might be a better time to use that tool, again, in an area where you've kind of got a very defined edge. So we'll kind of reiterate that more later on, because we will be using the clone stamp tool as well. So you can kind of see already, and we'll be making lots of comparisons, how quickly I've been able to kind of target some of these different blemishes here and begin to basically heal them, removing them. So he's got a lot of these little kind of dark little spots. I'm just kind of targeting some of those. I like to remove the blemishes early on in the process. It just makes things a lot easier, especially when we get into removing wrinkles and things like that, or if we have to move around any facial features, we've already got those blemishes out of the way. And so when I sample, I try to sample as close as I can, relatively close to whatever it is I'm removing or healing over, as you can see. Kind of getting some of these rogue hairs. So again, I'm just holding down Alt, sampling, and healing over. You've got some very fine kind of stray hair just up here on the forehead. So again, I don't want to worry about having this hair in the way later on. It's just kind of healing over that there. And again, this is where having all layers turned on, it can be very useful. You wouldn't want to do this all on the original image, obviously. So if you're unhappy with the results, you can very easily scrap the layer altogether or just erase away whatever areas that you've healed and just didn't work out for you. Okay? All right, very cool. We can try another tool over here, which is the spot healing brush tool. This tool is pretty cool because you don't have to sample from any specific area. Basically, what the spot healing tool does is it quickly removes blemishes and any other imperfections in your photo. And it works very similar to the healing brush tool, as you can see. Kind of removing that right there, little spot that we saw. Okay, so it's sampling pixels from the image, and it matches the texture, the lighting, the transparency, and shading of those sample pixels to the pixels being healed. But unlike the healing brush tool, the spot healing brush doesn't require you to specify a sample spot. Okay, so it's basically kind of examining the surrounding area of whatever little selection here you paint, and it's pulling from that whole area around it to fill it in. Okay, so it's another useful little tool. Works great, again, on little blemishes. It's kind of cleaning up some of these little hairs that I see just kind of over around here. Now again, this is kind of a defined edge right there, so this is probably where I would use the clone stamp tool, just so I can get in there and make sure that that edge doesn't become fuzzy or kind of smudged or blurry, which can result if I were to use the healing brush tool right in here or the spot healing brush. Okay, same thing, just kind of coming up here to the edge of the eyebrow. All right, so we'll go ahead and make another comparison here. And you can see we've already made a lot of progress removing these major blemishes. In our next lesson, we'll focus on removing a lot of these wrinkles here in the cheek areas. So stick around, we'll see you then. Just on basically removing all of those major blemishes, a lot of those spots. So just kind of making that comparison one more time. We also got rid of a few rogue hairs, as you can see right there. So I like to get those out of the way right out the gates before focusing on any kind of edits or changes or manipulations of other facial features. So let's go ahead and make a new layer. And again, I'll be titling these layers accordingly in between lessons so that you can very easily go back and know what we did on those different layers. Let's go ahead and go back to our healing brush tool. And again, make sure you have all layers set right there for your sampling. We're going to start focusing on some of these wrinkles that we have here on his cheeks. By removing these, we'll start to really be able to begin the process of turning back time and just making him look as if he's probably in his late 30s, maybe 40. So again, just as I kind of mentioned in the previous lesson, I try to sample relatively close to the area that I'm healing. Again, the healing brush tool is putting into account just the highlights and shadows of different areas that you're painting over. Whereas you wouldn't want to use the clone stamp tool, because you can see if I kind of sampled from right here and I continued on up, it's not going to give me as pretty of a blend right there, okay? Whereas with the healing brush tool, even though I do try to sample relatively close, even if I sampled over here and tried to heal that, it still does a pretty good job. Again, it's putting into account the the shadows and the highlights. So just kind of reiterating that, especially if you're not real familiar with some of the different healing tools over there in the tool panel. So already, if we kind of zoom out here, you can see what a huge change we've already made. We've started to really turn back time just by removing some of those major wrinkles as a result of just all the different facial expressions you make over time. Okay, so we'll go ahead and kind of continue on. I'm over here. Now I'm not going up into this area just yet below the eyes. We're going to kind of focus on that later on. And we'll talk about how you don't want to completely remove certain wrinkles entirely, like we are right now with these wrinkles on the cheeks. You don't want it to feel unnatural, especially given how old this gentleman is. If we removed every single bit of wrinkles on his face, there would be kind of a strange kind of look to him. There would be something that you would subconsciously know was off. Okay, so we want to keep that into account. That's something we'll talk about more as we move forward. Same thing with these little smile lines right here. I don't want to get into kind of removing any of that information right there, kind of on the sides of his nose, because it would flatten it out. You would lose kind of that tonal information right there. You would lose those shadows to show that there's form right there, that there's the meat, the muscle to the cheeks. So those are things that you want to think about. Same thing that we'll talk about later on with the eyes. You don't want to completely remove everything, the bags under the eyes entirely, because they'd almost look kind of alien-like. Again, it would be very unnatural. I'll kind of focus down here now, kind of in this area below the mouth. He's got just some different little wrinkles down in here, so I'm just kind of cleaning those up. Again, I'm kind of picking an area of skin as I do this, different areas that I think are pretty good. So kind of this area right here I feel like is proving pretty beneficial. And again, as you do this, if you're zooming way in, which you kind of want to really get in there and see what you're doing, but zoom out and then make a comparison. So whenever you're zooming way in on something, you kind of become tunnel visioned, and you can almost go too far with some of these types of changes. And that really almost applies with anything you do in Photoshop, whether you're painting or drawing or whatever. If you zoom way in, you can almost become lost in what you're doing. So definitely do that. Just do a little zoom out and kind of make some comparisons to see where you're at. And that gives you the opportunity to kind of rein yourself in, make any adjustments as needed. All right, so let's go ahead and zoom out again here and kind of see how we're doing. All right, making a lot of progress. So already we've started to peel away just a few years here for this gentleman's face by removing those wrinkles right there, as well as those kind of blemishes or sunspots or whatever you want to call them. Okay, so I'll just kind of tackle a few more kind of faint little lines that I see here. And you can also tell just by looking at his skin that we're going to have to maybe very faintly kind of address some of the skin issues that he has even further, kind of slightly softening some certain areas. You can kind of see over here in the cheeks, kind of these little whelps or bumps right here, probably from a lot of exposure to the sun. So we're going to try and take away from that area as being very emphasized. We kind of want to kind of soften it up a little bit, but we still want to retain that texture. So that's something else that we're going to tackle later on. I'll kind of share with you a method that would work for this particular photo. All right, so in our next lesson, we'll go ahead and continue on, and we'll go ahead and kind of focus on these kind of crow's feet that he has here on the outer corners of his eyes right there. And then from there, we'll actually focus on kind of the bag areas of his eyes where we see those wrinkles. So we're kind of working our way kind of inward. So stick around. We're making a lot of progress, and we'll continue on in our next lesson by basically using our healing brush tool to remove all of these different wrinkles that we had there on the cheeks. So you can already see what a huge difference we've made. And I just love how the healing brush works its magic. It's almost as if they were never there, just in the areas where we remove those wrinkles. So I want to now focus on these crow's feet right here on either side of the eyes, on the outer edges of the eyes basically. And I figured while we're at it, before we forget, I also want to kind of clean up the neck area as well. I think that would be an easy area to kind of forget about as we begin to become even more entrenched here in the face. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer here. We'll go back to our good old trusty healing brush tool. And basically, I want to go ahead and just remove these crow's feet. Now again, my objective in this case is I'm pushing to have this man appear as if he's late 30s, close to 40, okay? And so to achieve that, I really just want to get rid of those crow's feet. Now, again, would you need to take a portrait back that far? Let's say you're working in a portrait studio and you're retouching an image that you've taken of a client that's maybe in their kind of early to mid 50s, as I kind of guesstimated there at the beginning. You probably wouldn't need to completely remove these crow's feet. Now, as I mentioned in the previous lesson, you're probably wondering, well, what can I do to just kind of show remnants or just a little bit of those wrinkles? Well, we're going to tackle that in our next lesson when we focus on these bags under the eyes, and then moving on from that, these wrinkles in the forehead, where I don't want to completely remove them because it would feel a little too unnatural, okay? And so I'll kind of show you how we can do that. We'll be using a layer mask. And so I think especially with the bags under the eyes, that's going to be an important thing. But basically, I'm kind of doing the same thing as we've done over the past couple of lessons using the healing brush tool. And I'm just basically trying to sample as close as I can to these different wrinkles here. Just kind of removing a majority of those crow's feet. So already, if we kind of zoom out here, again, you want to kind of zoom out and make comparisons as you go. I think that makes a world of difference. Just getting rid of those creases right there really just adds to peeling away. We've already peeled away, I'd say, about 5 or 6 years. So if he was like, say, 55, I'd say he's maybe late 40s right now. Okay. So let's kind of go ahead and jump over here to the opposite side, still on this same layer here, and just kind of continue on. Just kind of addressing some of these little wrinkles that we have right here, just in the corners, the outer corners of the eyes. And again, the healing brush tool works great because it puts into account just the shadows and the highlights of what you're painting. So just a fantastic tool. Just kind of getting in these little fine knit areas right in here. Now areas like this where we got some of this black kind of coming in right there, you might want to go ahead and use the clone stamp, okay? To kind of clone in some of that. Again, you're kind of getting up to kind of an edge, and the healing brush tool doesn't perform as effectively when you get up to kind of very defined edges. All right, and kind of zooming out there. Let's have a look and see what we got. All right, very nice. Let's go ahead and make another layer. And again, I'll be titling those layers accordingly in between lessons. We'll kind of focus now on the neck. I just want to kind of clean up these wrinkles on the neck. I don't want to forget about the neck, especially if we make this guy look a lot younger in the face. That neck will definitely stand out there at the end. So let's go ahead and just kind of tackle that early on here. So the neck is obviously out of focus. Everything's kind of blurry. So I'm just kind of targeting kind of some of these dark toned areas, kind of dark shadowed areas. And while I'm at it, I'm also just kind of cleaning up some of these little kind of spots, kind of little red spots that I can kind of faintly see in there, even though they're blurred out. Just kind of addressing some of those as well. Just again, more skin blemishes that I want to go ahead and kind of remove. So again, just kind of tackling that there and working our way around. So as I kind of, for these types of wrinkles, I'm just kind of following, sometimes kind of right in behind or slightly above. Kind of a little bit of both, really, as I kind of heal that information. And again, just holding down Alt to sample from those different areas. All right, let's go ahead and zoom out one more time. All right, so I think that helps a lot too. Okay, so in our next lesson, we're going to move on and we're going to start talking about these bags under the eyes. We've spent a few lessons now just kind of getting acquainted, kind of getting our feet in the water here using the healing brush tool. And we can already see just some of the big changes that we've obviously made. But we're going to start talking about these bags under the eyes and kind of how we don't want to completely remove them. Same thing with these wrinkles on the forehead. We'll kind of talk about how we can remove them slightly, and we're going to be using a layer mask to kind of help us do that. So stick around and we'll go ahead and kind of continue on turning back time for this gentleman. So we'll see you then. Those crow's feet that are on the outer edges of the eyes right there, as well as cleaning up the neck. If you recall, we had some wrinkles down there on the neck that were still visible despite being out of focus. So we now want to go ahead and focus on these bags under the eyes. We have some wrinkles in there, as well as these frown lines, just these little wrinkles right above the eyebrows. And now that we've become acquainted with the healing brush tool and what it's capable of, we want to start thinking about the degree to which we remove some of these wrinkles on the face. So let's go ahead and create a new layer, and I'll kind of show you what it will look like if you remove these wrinkles in their entirety. So just as we've done before, I'm sampling, just holding down Alt, using my healing brush tool, and I'm basically just cloning out these wrinkles. Okay? So just kind of getting in there, getting right up to the edge. Okay, so we've got that side, and we'll go ahead and come over here. And already you can probably notice that it just doesn't feel quite natural. Okay, so it's too clean. Okay, it just feels very unnatural, almost kind of alien-like. And if you really wanted to make it look even worse, you could take your clone stamp tool and just completely remove that bag under the eye in its entirety. Okay, and that's kind of quick and crude what I'm doing right here. I'm just trying to illustrate a point that it looks unnatural in that there's no supportive element right there to basically hold the eye in the socket. It doesn't feel like the eye sits naturally in the socket right there. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Z, just take a few steps back, kind of remove what I did there with the clone stamp. So what can we do here to kind of rein this back in just a little bit? I still want to show some evidence here of these wrinkles. Well, on this layer that we created, I'm going to go ahead and create a layer mask, and you can do this by clicking on this button here. Now, before I do this, I'm going to hold down Alt and then click on it, and this will give me a layer that's a mask rather that's filled with black. And so having done that, we can see now that all of that information that we just did right there with the healing brush tool, you can no longer see it. Okay, so anything in black is going to give us something that's very much visible. And if we go ahead and switch our foreground color to white, anything we paint in white will reveal what's underneath that mask. So with our foreground color set to white, I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush tool. I'm just going to go ahead and use this soft round brush. It's just a default brush. It comes with Photoshop. Might adjust the size just a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and come over here to my brush panel. And let's go ahead and check mark transfer. And you can see here we have opacity and flow. Don't worry about changing the percentage for the jitter, but focus on the controls for each one of these. I'm using a stylus, so I'm making sure that these are set to pen pressure. Okay. If you're using like a mouse or something, you may want to come up here and adjust your opacity and flow up here at the top of your control panel. This basically allows me to dictate the level or the degree to which my opacity and flow is affected based off of how much pressure I apply with my stylus. Okay, So again, we've got white as our foreground color, and making sure that this mask is still selected, I'm painting white over that area of the mask. And you can kind of see it faintly revealed in there. So I'm starting to kind of cover back up or reveal basically that cloned information that I applied with my healing brush tool. And if we kind of zoom in here, you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I still want to kind of have some remnants of those wrinkles in there. It'll just feel more natural, especially given kind of the age that I'm trying to peel back for this gentleman. Okay, and of course, if you want to go back in the other direction, if you want to reveal a little bit more of it, you can switch back to black as your foreground color. So that's feeling a little bit nicer. So we haven't removed the wrinkles in their entirety. There's still a little bit of that wrinkled information in there. That just feels a little bit more natural than having something that's completely flush, completely clean. Let's go ahead and basically repeat this process with our frown lines. So going back to my healing brush tool, we'll do the same thing. I'll just clone out that information there, basically sampling along the edges of those lines. And again, the healing brush tool, it's putting into account the shadows and the lighting. I'll even get rid of these little lines right here across the bridge of the nose. So it's good to kind of remove them in their entirety, just to kind of see what it looks like and then rein yourself in. That's kind of what I like. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, same thing, holding down Alt, clicking on the Layer Mask button right here. Again, you can see everything is restored, switching back to white as my foreground color. And we'll go ahead and start to kind of reveal some of that information that we created using our healing brush tool. And so I still want to kind of see these little frown lines right here, but I just don't want them to be as prominent. Okay? So something kind of like that. And then, of course, making that comparison by just checking and unchecking the visibility icon right here out to the left of the layer. Okay? So I kind of like that, being able to see just a little bit there. And again, we could kind of go back in the other direction just a little bit more if we want to. All right, very nice. Really happy with how that's looking. Again, just kind of making those visual comparisons there. So in our next lesson, we're going to continue on focusing on these brow wrinkles right here that we have. Again, we'll kind of keep the same mindset. We don't want to remove them in their entirety. We don't want him to feel like he was Botoxed or anything like that, right? So we'll focus on that. And then from there, we're going to switch it up. And we're going to go ahead and start focusing on some of the stubble that he has and how we can kind of work around getting rid of a lot of these little white hairs, again attributing to the goal of turning back time with our guy here. So stick around and we'll catch you in our next lesson. The bags underneath our gentleman's eye here, and basically we didn't want to reduce them in their entirety, so we still have some remnants of just those wrinkles that we see right there. And I think that is very important to keep in mind. You wouldn't want it to be completely flush up against the bottom of the eye. It would feel very unnatural, very otherworldly, to put it lightly. And then the same thing here with the wrinkles kind of above the brow right there, above the eyebrow. Just kind of having some remnants of those frown lines right there, I think is very important. Again, it adds to that. It keeps everything looking natural. It has a very natural quality by maintaining that. So we want to carry that mindset on to the brow here, or to the forehead rather, above the brow. So I'm going to create a new layer just by clicking right here on this little icon at the bottom of our layers panel. And just as I did in the previous lesson, I'm going to be using my healing brush tool, and I'm going to go ahead and just remove the wrinkles entirely to begin with. And then we'll rein ourselves back in using a layer mask, just as we did on the frown lines and then those wrinkles underneath the eyes. So hopefully by now you're starting to become rather comfortable with the healing brush tool. It's a really excellent tool. And again, for something like this, you could probably even use the spot healing brush, which again, you don't have to sample. You basically are just painting that selection there, and it's gathering information from the surrounding pixels. Okay, and it's basically just pulling that information in, creating new pixels right there to fill in that that area. But I kind of like the spot healing brush because I can be a little bit more methodical, a little more calculated in where I source areas of skin that I want to have replace these wrinkles. So just kind of finishing out this little area over here. Okay, let's zoom out and we can see how that's really not what I want. It feels just too clean, okay? We don't want it to appear like he got a Botox injection or something in his forehead, right? But you can see clearly the change that we've made. So let's go ahead and we're going to apply a layer mask. So I'm just holding down Alt and then clicking on this little layer mask icon right there. And again, let's go ahead and take a step back, Control Z, if you will. If you just click on that, it gives you the layer mask right there. But anything in white basically will show you everything that is visible, okay, everything that you've already have on that layer. But if we go ahead and hold down Alt and create a layer mask that's filled with black, then everything that's on that layer is masked out. Okay, so anything in black is masked out. Anything white is visible. So just reiterating that, I'm going to switch to white as my foreground color, back to my brush tool, and I basically have the same setup for my brush tool as I did in the previous lesson. Soft round brush, and then I went to my brush panel transfer with pen pressure set for the controls for both opacity and flow. So what I'm going to do now, I'll go ahead and size up my brush a little bit more, is I'm going to kind of just paint some white, making sure the mask is selected. So painting some white over the mask, and I'm kind of revealing that cloned information that I have on that layer. And so I want these wrinkles to still be there, but just very faintly. So again, I imagine this guy is, you know, late 30s. He's probably about 36, maybe 36, 37. So I kind of want these wrinkles to kind of already start to be forming in there. Now, of course, everyone ages differently, so even something like this can be up for debate, but I just kind of want them to be very subtle, kind of want to have them kind of be in there just very lightly. And of course, zooming out, kind of making that comparison is also very important. But already I'm kind of liking how that's looking. So it's not perfectly clean. We can see those kind of little ridges in there. And I think that helps us from not going too far back, and it still feels natural. All right. Okay, so what we're going to do in our next lesson, we're going to kind of change it up. We've spent several lessons now basically removing wrinkles and removing blemishes, things like that. We're going to focus now on his hair, facial hair, okay? Now, I wouldn't recommend trying to remove the facial hair because he's kind of beyond the point of it just being stubble. He's kind of entered in to the beard phase, okay? So we're not going to try and remove it. Rather, we're going to try and kind of color and basically hide the fact that he has gray hair. So that's going to be the focus in the next lesson. Before we move on, let's go ahead and make kind of a comparison, kind of see how far we've come here. So you can already see just we've made some huge changes. You can actually turn the visibility on and off for the group itself. But you can already see we've peeled away several years now for this gentleman. Okay, so stick around. We'll go ahead and catch you in the next lesson where we'll focus on the facial hair. We've spent a few lessons becoming acclimated to some of the different healing tools over here in our tool panel by basically removing or partly removing some different wrinkles, as well as completely removing a lot of those major blemishes. We're going to go ahead and shift gears now and focus on his facial hair. So the goal here will not be to remove his facial hair. That would be a lot easier if it were closer to being stubble, kind of like what you kind of see just kind of right in here. I think at that point we could easily do that, but he's kind of crossed over that threshold. He's kind of started to enter the realm of kind of starting to have a beard. So what we're going to focus on is basically changing the color, basically the appearance of these areas where we have just kind of gray or white hairs. And again, this will kind of add to us peeling away those years. So I'm going to come over here to my layers panel, and I'll go ahead and make a new layer right there. And so this first step that we're going to take is basically applying kind of a base color. There's a number of different ways you could really go about doing something like this. And it really kind of, in the end, depends on kind of the image you're working with. But if we kind of zoom in here, we can see he's got some pretty dark hairs and then a few kind of gray or white hairs. But those dark hairs, if you look at them, those individual little hairs, they're pretty high contrast, okay? They're just really just little black lines. Now, with all these kind of clusters of gray and white hairs, I just want to kind of paint a base over them, and then we'll do a second pass on a different layer to kind of individually manually paint over some hairs. I'm going to grab my brush tool, right-click to bring up my brush preset picker. Let's go ahead and go with a soft round brush. I might take down the size just a little there. I'm going to come over here to my brush panel. I'm going to turn on transfer, and just as before, I want pen pressure enabled for both of the controls for opacity and flow. Since I am using a stylus, a pressure sensitive stylus, I can dictate the opacity and flow based off of how much pressure I apply. Okay. All right. So I want to go ahead and hold down Alt, and I kind of want to sample kind of a real dark brown kind of area. I don't want to use black because it's not really going to give me the best visual result that I want. It's going to feel kind of artificial. Now, right now, as I just kind of paint over these hairs, what's happening is I'm basically covering up information. That's really not what I want to do. I'm not trying to, because if I keep doing this, you're just going to see kind of a paint streak, right? So this is where we want to think about the blend mode we want to use. And so I'm going to come up here in our layers panel where it says normal, and I'm going to change this to where it says hard light. So it's right there. And again, it kind of depends on the image, and when it comes to blend modes, and you want to kind of experiment really with a lot of the different just blend modes that we have over here at our disposal. But I kind of found through just some experimentation that hard light in this case was going to give me kind of the visual result that I wanted in regards to kind of painting this kind of initial base. So hard light, basically you can think of it as it's multiplying or it screens the colors depending on the blend color. And this effect is really kind of similar to just shining a harsh spotlight on an image. Okay, but already I've started to reduce that kind of gray-white cluster of hair that we have down there. Okay, and I like that it's not completely black, kind of like you see in between those hairs. We can still have a little bit of texture and dimension. Okay, so I'm just kind of painting just kind of a base over some of these little areas, even in the areas where it's kind of out of focus over here on the sides. Okay, so it's kind of dabbing that in, and even here, just kind of on the above the upper lip, just very lightly applying pressure with my stylus, kind of working in a little bit of that as well. Okay. All right, now what I want to go ahead and do is I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to go ahead and right click, and this time I'm going to choose a hard round brush. I'm going to take it down considerably, probably around like maybe 4 or 5. And then over here in my brush panel, I'm going to turn on shape dynamics. For the size, I want to have the control set to pen pressure. And this allows me to dictate the size of my brush tip within the range up to the maximum of 5 pixels there, basically. Okay, and so this is where this kind of process can become rather tedious. Okay, and it'll take a considerable amount of time. But what I'm doing is I'm basically just kind of painting over each one of these individual little hairs, right? And I may want to kind of revisit that base again a little bit later if I want to kind of push that a little bit more. And I think it's okay to have a few kind of gray and white hairs that'll still be kind of evident. I'm just trying to kind of reduce them, reduce the amount. Again, I'm kind of aiming for a guy that is kind of in his late 30s, and often, and of course everyone is different, often you'll start having a few of those gray hairs start to poke in. But already if we kind of zoom out there and we kind of make a comparison, you can already see what I've done. So again, there's a lot of different ways you could really go about this, but for something like this, I kind of like just manually doing it. I feel like I have just a little bit more control. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these individual little hairs with you. Again, it would be very time consuming, rather tedious, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea as to what I'm doing here. Now with this long kind of hair right there, I kind of don't like it. It looks a little weird. So I might go back to my spot healing brush, and I'll just go ahead and do this on the same layer. And I'll just go ahead and get rid of that obnoxious looking hair that's kind of creeping its way out. Okay. And then I might just go ahead and kind of paint over that little area right there. All right. But already, just with what little we've done, you can see what a big difference that's made. And I think that just adds to peeling away a few years on his face. All right, so in the next lesson, we're going to continue on, and we're going to focus on some facial features and maybe reshaping a few, again, to kind of push for something that feels just a little bit more youthful. We'll focus kind of on this eye right here and the nose. So stick around. We'll catch you then. Is facial hair, basically making it a little bit darker, removing those little patches of gray and white hairs. I want to draw our attention now to his nose and the screen right eyebrow area. If you look at the nose, it's kind of crooked, kind of pointing towards the screen right. And I understand that nobody's nose is perfectly symmetrical, but I'm going to show you how we can kind of straighten it out. So if you wanted to do something like that, this is a good example to work with. Another thing to keep in mind is that your nose, as well as your ears, they keep growing as you age. And so we may want to reduce the ball of the nose just very, very slightly. If we look right here at the screen right eyebrow area, you'll notice how it's kind of drooped down much more than the screen left. So I want to kind of raise that up, and really what I'm aiming to have here is just this space that we have over here on the screen left, and I want to have that over here, and that'll just kind of, having that space will kind of liven that eye up just a little bit more. So we're going to be using Liquify, a powerful feature located in Photoshop to kind of move pixels around and adjust their size. Before we do that, I want to make a merged copy of everything I have here over my layers panel. So just by selecting a visible layer, I'm going to go ahead and click Shift, Control, Alt, and E on my keyboard. That gives me that merged copy. Bear in mind, whenever you do this, you want to make sure that you only have visible the layers you want to include. In this case, all of them. Okay. Now I'm going to do something that it's new to Photoshop CC. So you can't do this prior to previous versions of Photoshop, and this is going to relate to working in Liquify. You can now use a smart object in Liquify, okay? And I'll kind of show you a little bit more clearly when we come back out of Liquify. But basically, we're going to go ahead and right-click and convert this layer to a smart object, okay? We have that little icon. If you've ever worked with smart objects before, you can see that it's signified by that little icon right there on the layer thumbnail. Let's go into Liquify, Filter, Liquify. We're in our Liquify dialog box. We have some incredibly powerful tools over here on the screen left. And then over here on the screen right, we're going to focus on this area, the tool options, which basically allow us to change how these different tools behave when we use them. So we're going to be using this forward warp tool. This basically allows us to move pixels around, as you can see right there, okay? Now, I want to be mindful not to move areas around the nose. I don't want to mess with those areas. I just want to focus on the nose. So I'm going to use our Freeze Mask tool right there. And I'm just going to paint just kind of a rough, doesn't have to be pretty, rough mask around the nose. Just that whole area around. Okay, I don't want any of that information being manipulated. All right, very good. We'll grab our forward warp tool, and if you look over here in the tool options, we can adjust the brush size. I usually like to adjust it, come back over here, kind of hover to see how large it is. That feels pretty good. We have the brush density. This controls the edge strength. So if it's at 100%, you're controlling the entire radius of this cursor, of this circle. And you can kind of get a sense of that just by moving it around, okay? I'm going to take it down probably somewhere between 30 and 40. So that concentrates that strength more towards the center of that circle, or the cursor, if you will. And that just gives me a little bit more control as I kind of straighten that nose out, just kind of finessing it over. And of course the brush pressure, that's just the distortion strength based off of how much pressure you're applying with your stylus. Okay, that's feeling pretty nice. Let's come over here to our pucker tool. This basically implodes pixels towards the cursor. Again, I can adjust the brush size. I want to kind of focus on the ball of the nose first. And then brush density, again, it's just the edge strength, it's just we talked about with the forward warp tool. And then we have brush rate. I'll show you kind of what it looks like at 100%. If we just click, you can see how quickly that happens. So I don't want that, obviously. So I want to bring that down, probably around 35 would be fine. So now I have a little bit more control, doesn't happen as quickly. And so now as I tap, I can just very slightly start to bring the ball, that nose down in size. Again, the brush density, having it low, I kind of like that there. It's not happening as uniformly over the entire tip of the nose, so I kind of have a little bit of control, just kind of working my way around that tip, getting it just the way I want. But again, it's up to your personal preference. For the wings of the nose, I might bring that brush density up higher and just have those wings kind of come down just a little bit more uniformly. Again, we're increasing that brush strength closer towards the edges of the circle, okay, or your cursor, if you want to call it that. Let's go ahead and take our thaw mask tool, get rid of that mask. I'm liking how that's looking. It's much straighter, okay? All right, so if you're not happy with any of those changes, we have a reconstruct tool over here. You can easily restore all that if you wanted to, but I'm pretty happy with the way it's looking. I'm going to paint another mask over the eye here, okay, just above that, the black area of the eyelash, okay? And then we'll kind of come around over here above as well. So we're going to pull that area upward. Okay, using the forward warp tool, might take the brush size down just a little bit there. So something kind of like that. Okay, and inevitably we're going to get a little bit of stretching there along the edge of that mask. That's okay, I'll show you how to fix that. So you can kind of see right in there what I'm talking about. The skin is stretched, but I already like the space that I'm getting. Okay, so if you're happy with these changes, click OK. Now this comes back to having this layer as a smart object, meaning we can click on liquefy right there. We can go back in and basically undo those changes if we want, or make further changes. Basically, the original merge copy is still preserved because it's a smart object. This is something that's new to Photoshop CC. Okay. All right, very good. So on this smart object layer, what I'm going to go ahead and do is take my lasso tool. I'll make a selection right here above the eye, just of that skin right there. I'm going to right click, choose layer via copy. Let's zoom in here just a little bit. I'm going to hit Control T on my keyboard to free transform it, then right click, choose flip horizontal. We're going to bring that little patch of skin, kind of doing a little bit of surgery now, if you want to think of it like that. And I'm just going to place that over that stretched area right there. And I right-clicked again and chose Warp to kind of manipulate it. And then I'm just going to take my eraser tool, using just a soft round brush in this case, and I'm just kind of blending that in. Now I understand that this is kind of a destructive edit to this little piece that I brought over, but since it was something that I was very quickly and easily able to do, I'm not too worried about it. But already, that's feeling a lot nicer. So I'm just kind of weaving that in so it doesn't feel stretched out. Later on, towards the end of the course, we'll be doing just some kind of final touch-ups overall. We may do a little bit of extra stuff right there to kind of weave it in even further. But again, having that as a smart object will allow you to go back into Liquify to readjust any of those changes that you've made. If it's not a smart object, then you're stuck with those changes and manipulations you've made in Liquify. All right, so in our next lesson, we're going to move on to the skin and just kind of talk about how we can kind of smooth out some little indiscrepancies here and there. So stick around. We'll see you then. Of the nose and the left eyebrow area, I'm ready to draw our attention to the skin itself. So once you're happy with the removal of various wrinkles on the face and the degree to which certain ones are visible and even major blemishes, you can start to really get in there and examine the skin and look for little indiscrepancies. If you look here on the side of the cheeks, for example, you see kind of these little raised kind of areas, little whelps, little bumps, whatever you want to call them, probably from years of exposure being out in the sun. And so what I want to do is just kind of lessen their intensity, if you want to think of it like that. I want to kind of soften the skin, kind of smooth it slightly, but not to a point to where it feels plastic or porcelain. Okay, so we're going to go through some specific steps. There's a lot of different ways you could go about doing this. I'm going to share with you one way that I think you might find relatively fast and effective. So let's go ahead and make another merged copy of everything we have done thus far. So just as we did in the previous lesson with one of our visible layers selected, hit Shift, Control, Alt, and E. Gives us another merged copy right there. Let's come up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Bear in mind that we're not going to be blurring anything at this point. I just want to use the radius here as kind of a gauge. And so what I'm looking for are the varying tones in the skin, and I basically want to take that value to a point to where they start to blend together relatively smoothly. So probably right about there would be fine. Now don't click OK. We're going to take this value that we have here as we see these tones start to blend together smoothly, and we're going to use it for another filter effect. Okay, and also keep in mind that the value that we have right here will be different. It'll vary depending on the image you're working with. So keep that in mind. Click Cancel, come back up to Filter, this time go to Other and choose High Pass. And often I've used High Pass to kind of sharpen an image, kind of make certain areas pop. But what I want to do is enter in that same value of 12.6 in this case into the High Pass radius box right there. And you can kind of see what it looks like right now. Let's go ahead and click OK. All right, very good. Now let's go back to Filter, and we're going to go to Blur this time. And this time we will add a little bit of blur. Okay, and so this time, how do we kind of dictate how much we're going to blur? Well, a good measuring approach for this particular method is to apply a value that's 1/3 of the value you used for the high pass. So if you're bad at math, break out the old calculator, dust it off. In this case, you would take 12.6 and divide it by 3, and that should give you a value of 4.2. And so we'll go ahead and click OK this time. All right, so what we've essentially done here is we're laying the groundwork for the texture to be retained. Okay, so what I want to go ahead and do now is take this texture layer essentially, and I want to go ahead and invert it. So with the layer selected, hit Control I on your keyboard, that inverts it. Still looks pretty crazy, kind of scary looking, but again, we're going through some specific steps that you'll see begin to come together here pretty quickly. So what I want to do now is change the blend mode to apply this layer over everything that we basically have done thus far. So come up here to where it says normal. You can see all your blend modes. And we're going to use linear light. So go ahead and choose linear light. And again, we've basically laid the groundwork for the texture to be preserved. And what's happening now, it's kind of looking overly smoothed. Okay, that's kind of becoming the dominant thing right now. So this is where we want to change the percentage for the opacity. And again, this value as well, that's going to vary depending on the image you're working with. So you want to just kind of play around with that and take it to a point to where you think it works best visually. But I'm kind of liking what we have right here at about 20%. We could probably go maybe a little bit higher, but I kind of feel like 20% or so is the ticket. So if I just hide and unhide the visibility of this layer. It's a subtle change, but I think it helps, especially right here on the cheeks. You can kind of see the difference. Now, what we want to do is, the problem that's happening now is it's being applied to everything, not just the skin. So I don't really want it applied to the hair and the eyes and the eyebrows. So this is where we can add a layer mask. Okay, and what I want to actually go ahead and do is change that layer mask and fill it with black. So you can actually just go ahead and invert it, hitting Control-I. Alternatively, you could have held down Alt and clicked that button. Basically, everything in black, it's masked out. And so we'll use white as our foreground color to reveal the areas of the skin where we want that basically that texture to be revealed. So using my brush tool, I'll right-click, bring up my brush preset picker. We'll use a soft round default brush. And since I'm using a stylus, I like to go into my brush panel, turn on transfer. And just as before, I like to have both controls for opacity and flow set to pin pressure, just because I can dictate them based off of how much pressure I apply with my stylus. And so now I'm just kind of coming over the areas of the skin, making sure you have your thumbnail for your mask selected. And we're starting to reveal those changes we just made to the skin. And you start to make those comparisons as you go. So I'm just kind of going over all of the skin here. I'm applying a good bit of pressure in these areas, around the cheeks, around the mouth, over the nose. Up here on the forehead, maybe not so much. I was noticing it felt just a little bit too blurry, just kind of right in there. So I'm being a little bit lighter, and you can even tell just based off of the value right there, it appears a little bit more grayish right there in the thumbnail. Okay, but again, just kind of making those comparisons there, and I feel like that's working pretty well. Another thing I wanted to mention really quick about the nose, you probably have noticed it's kind of out of focus, and there's not a whole lot we can really do about that. This is a stock photo that we're using from iStock, and it kind of there was kind of a shallow depth of field, I think, when this image was taken. I would have liked the nose to be a little bit more in focus, but I think it's okay for what we're doing. All right, so what we're going to do in the next lesson, we're going to continue to focus on the skin, and I want to basically kind of pull out just a lot of the red that we have in here. It feels a little bit kind of sun-cooked. So I want to kind of pull some of that out. So we'll go through some specific steps to do that. So stick around, and we'll see you then. I thought we'd go ahead and take this moment to kind of make another comparison, just see how far we have come. So just by hiding the visibility of our retouching group, you can see the dramatic changes that we have made over the last several lessons. Okay, so we've gone through a lot of steps here, and we've already peeled away years of this gentleman's face. So we've basically taken him from, I would say, early to maybe mid-50s, and I would say now he looks probably late 30s, probably getting close to 40. We're pretty close to where I kind of envisioned his face being. Just looking at it, I would say he's probably like 36, maybe 37. So what we want to do from this point onward now is make a lot of little adjustments to really just help improve the quality of the face. That'll just make it look a lot more presentable. And we're going to be doing that with the skin in this lesson. So again, I kind of mentioned how we got a lot of just kind of blotchiness, kind of reddish, pinkish blotchiness everywhere. So what I want to go ahead and do is we'll come down here to the bottom of our layers panel. We'll click on this little circle right here that's kind of divided. And we're going to go ahead and choose Hue Saturation. All right. So under our Hue Saturation, I want to go to where it says Master, and let's choose Reds. All right, very good. And so I'm going to take this eyedropper tool right here, just clicking on that, and you want to basically choose an area where you think there's some red blotchiness that's pretty prominent. And for some reason, this right here in the tip of his nose, that area kind of stands out to me. So I'm going to just sample that, and you can kind of see it kind of rain in right there on our little color scale right there. Okay, and then having done that, go ahead and choose an area of skin that you think is of better quality using the far right eyedropper tool. So as far as better skin quality, I kind of like how this area over here kind of looks. So it's basically something a little less red. And so what you can do now is if you take your hue slider, take it all the way to the far left, you can see all of those areas of blotchy red. It's now shown in blue. Okay, so there's again on the nose right there was kind of an area where I really saw that to be prominent. So if you want to start to remove a lot of that blotchiness, start going back into the positive, past 0. And so just kind of coming into the positive there, probably right around 6 actually, I feel like took a lot of that out. So we didn't really have to go too terribly far there into the positive. Okay. And then what we can do now, as I kind of look at this, I may want to kind of take the saturation down just a little as well. So maybe right around 14, 15, 16, somewhere right around there. Okay, so that's feeling pretty nice. Now the image overall, at least here on my end, it feels a little bit, just a little bit yellow. So we could go to our yellows here, okay, and we could just kind of pull that saturation down some as well. It's just feeling a little too yellow for my liking. Just kind of pulling it down about 20 right there. Let's jump back to our layers panel, and we can see the big change that we've made here. All right, so I feel like this feels just a little bit more natural. Just all that red right there, it's just a little too intense. It just feels a little too sunbaked for my liking. So I feel like this just kind of calms all that down. All right, so we still want to have, you know, a little bit of red, you know, pigment in the skin, you know, to make it, you know, so he appears that he's alive, right? But just kind of reducing that, I think, was very beneficial in this case. And again, those values that we entered, those are going to vary depending on, of course, the image that you're working with. So those aren't going to always be the same values that you'd enter in. Okay. All right. So in our next lesson, I'd like us to shift gears once again and kind of focus on some areas that we could improve, which are some areas that are kind of hot spots. We kind of have a hot spot right up here on the forehead. Right here on the tip of the nose, feels a little bit blown out right there. And then even just kind of right here on the sides of the mouth, feel just a little bit too bright. Okay, so we want to kind of reduce those, and this is where we'll come back to using one of our healing tools over here, which will be the patch tool. Okay, so you might have to hold down, and you can see all the different healing tools. So that's what we're going to be using in the next lesson. I'll kind of share with you the approach that we'll take. So stick around, and we'll catch you then. We have made thus far. At this point, I start to make a lot of comparisons, just where we started out with and where we are. And again, I think we've really peeled away a lot of years, taking him from a guy that appears to be about, I'd say, early to mid-50s to a guy that is probably in his, I'd say, later 30s, getting close to 40. I look at this and I say he's probably 36 or 37, so pretty close to where I want him to be. So I want to focus now on some hot spots that I see. Basically right here in the top of the forehead, we kind of have a little hot spot right there. The light is kind of bright right there. On the tip of the nose especially. And then kind of on the sides of the mouth right here, these little areas, I might want to just remove those almost entirely. But for the tip of the nose and the forehead, I just want to reduce them. I don't want them to be removed completely. You want to be mindful of this because you can start to flatten out an image. You still want that sense of volume and depth to be there. So we're going to make another merged copy. So hit Shift, Control, Alt, and E. And that'll give us another merged copy on a layer right there. And again, make sure you have a visible layer selected when you do that. And this merged copy, just to reiterate, will include all the layers that you have visible, which is noted by those little eye icons. In this case, it's everything. All right, so we're going to use our patch tool that we selected towards the end of the previous lesson. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a selection right around that little hot spot right there. All right, very cool. So having done that, what I can do is drag to another area of the forehead, probably right about there, and then release. And you can see now it's replaced that. Now the entire hotspot is gone, so I don't want it to be completely removed. So this is where we can use a little feature to kind of reduce that. Okay, so really quick, we can hit Control H to hide the visibility of our selection. It's still there. We didn't deselect it. And so what we're going to go ahead and do now is come up here to Edit, and we're going to go to Fade Patch Selection. All right, and this gives us a little dialog box here where we can take the opacity down for that patch. And so we're kind of starting to just kind of reduce there. You can see what it looks like at 0, and then just by kind of bringing it up a little there. So right about there. Just kind of taking it down just a little, I think, is good. Okay. Now you're probably wondering, well, why don't you just reduce the opacity of this layer that you did that on over here in the Layers panel? Well, because I plan on reducing the blown out areas on different parts of the face, and that's going to vary, okay, depending on how blown out a certain area is, and we're going to be using the same method, so they're all going to be different. So you wouldn't want to have the same opacity percentage for all of these different areas you've edited with the patch tool. Okay, so jumping here to the nose, that nose tip right there, making that selection, and I'm kind of pulling that up slightly to right about there. Okay, I'll hit Control H. Let's hide that and kind of see what that looks like there. And then what I want to go ahead and do is come back to Edit, Fade Patch Selection. You can see what it looks like gone, and then we can kind of start to bring that back up right there. Okay. And of course, making a comparison as we go. So just kind of taking it down there just a little bit. Again, that percentage we use for the fade patch selection is going to be different for all of these different areas. So that's why we don't want to reduce the opacity for the layer itself for all of them. Okay. Coming over here to these little side areas of the mouth, I just kind of feel like I could probably remove those. We could probably use other methods, but I think the fade patch method will work just fine. So kind of taking it right about there, I think is good. Control H to hide that selection, and then fade patch selection, going under Edit. Kind of see what that looks like without, and then I like to come back up with it. So right about there is pretty good. Okay, and I'll do the same thing over here. Right, and I'll hide my selection, Control H, then fade patch selection once again. It's right about there. So I didn't entirely remove them, kind of like I said, but just kind of lessening them. Okay, each one of these is going to have a different percentage as far as the opacity goes. All right, so that's feeling a lot better. We'll make another comparison here. So I feel like that really helped just improve the overall quality of the image. You can see now how distracting those blown out areas really were now that we've kind of reined them in a little bit. So very nice. All right, so in our next lesson, we're going to start kind of jumping around here to some other areas. At this point, we're kind of tightening up everything on the face. Okay, we've pretty well got to the point in time where we want him to be aged, and so now we're kind of tightening up little details. I'm going to focus on the eyes in the next lesson. He's got some bloodshot eyes, especially this one right here looks really rough. And then from there, we're also going to focus on his lips. He's kind of got some lip crusties right here. I want to kind of clean all that up, so that'll be kind of towards the end where we're just kind of making some overall edits using some of our healing tools, just kind of cleaning and tightening up different areas. So we're getting pretty close, so stick around. We'll catch you in our next lesson. You can see that towards the inner corners of the eyes, you can see he's got some pretty notorious veins. He looks very bloodshot in the eyes. So I basically want to remove those veins and just kind of clean up the whites of the eyes and then maybe brighten them up just slightly. So let's go ahead and create a new layer. And we'll go ahead and use our clone stamp tool for this demonstration. I'm just going to right click, bringing up my brush preset picker. We'll go ahead and go with a default soft round brush. And then I'll turn on transfer, making sure I have pen pressure for the controls for both opacity and flow. And we might zoom in here just a little bit more, hitting Control equals on our keyboard. And I'm just going to hold down Alt to kind of sample from the white areas of the eye and basically begin to kind of clean up these little veins. I might even kind of come over here and pull in some of that white. Now you'll notice that this isn't perfectly white, okay? And you really don't want the eyes to be pure white, or at least the whites of the eyes. And so later on when we start to brighten them up, you want to keep that in mind because it can start to make them, if you get them too bright, they're just going to look scary, kind of alien-like, okay? But already you can start to see kind of how we're starting to clear out kind of that bloodshot look that he has going in his eyes there. So this part can be a little bit tedious. And so, as I mentioned, kind of at the very beginning of this course, the clone stamp tool works great in situations like this where you have definite edges. Okay? Well, all you're doing is just directly copying over sampled pixels from one place to another. Okay, it's not putting into account any kind of shadows or highlights or texture, anything like that. It's just kind of a direct copy. Okay, so that's feeling pretty nice right there. All right. All right, very good. And I may want to kind of sample from kind of this darker tone area here, kind of work a little bit of that kind of back in, just because I don't want it to be perfectly, I don't want it to be the same value here as it is over here. We want to still maintain a little bit of a shadow, kind of like you see over here. Okay, so I'm just using the clone stamp to kind of work in a little bit of that. I think we can easily do that, just painting that back in. And again, having transfer turned on, I think it helps with that. All right, so that's feeling pretty good. I'll kind of zoom out there, see how that's looking. Let's go ahead and shift gears and kind of move over to the opposite side here. And we'll just kind of start to clone out these little veins right here, just cleaning up the eyes. So already that feels much better. Same thing over here. We'll just kind of clean up this little area. Trying to sample relatively close in as often as I can next to those veins. All right, very good. So there's a number of different ways you could really go about this. You could even use your brush tool, just sampling the kind of the different values of white there and painting over those veins. But I think this way works just fine, pretty effective. All right, very cool. And again, we might even go ahead and try that. I can take my brush tool here and kind of sample some of that. Just kind of want to have a nice shadow just kind of right in there. So we can still use the brush tool. It might kind of help us even out actually some of those values that we have there. When I say values, I mean like your darks and your lights. Okay, that's feeling pretty nice though. So just kind of making another comparison here. It's much better. He's no longer bloodshot in his eye. So now I want to kind of brighten his eyes up just slightly. So to do this, I'm going to come over here to the bottom of our layers panel and we'll click on this little circle. And we're going to go ahead and go with levels. All right. And so under our levels, I'm just going to take this little white bracket right here. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of pull it slightly to the left. Now you can see what's happening is we're basically brightening up the whole image, and we totally do not want that. So this is where I basically want to take the layer mask that comes with the adjustment layer, and I'm going to go ahead and take that and invert it. So to do that, just as we've done before, Control I, that inverts it, so everything is masked out. And then we're going to take, still using our brush tool in white as our foreground. Let's zoom back in here, and we'll kind of start to reveal in some of that lighter value that we have. We're starting to establish. And so this is meant to just be kind of a very subtle kind of thing, kind of zooming out there. So you can kind of see just by making that comparison by toggling the visibility of that adjustment layer, kind of the difference that makes. So that feels pretty nice. And of course, if you wanted to rein it back in just a little bit, you can switch to black as your foreground color and just very lightly kind of paint back over just a little bit of that. Okay, and so again, I'm using my brush tool, and I should still be using a soft round brush with transfer enabled. Looks like I am, so just kind of double checking that there just to make sure. All right, but already that feels just worlds better just with those couple of changes we've made with his eyes. So he no longer feels bloodshot. And that just, again, kind of makes his eyes feel a little bit more lively, kind of like what we did right here, just adding that space and kind of pulling that brow up some. I think that helped a lot as well early on. Okay, so in our next and final lesson, we're going to just kind of work all around the entire face, just kind of doing little touch-ups. We're going to address the lips finally, just kind of removing just kind of some of the dry skin, just some of his lip crusties, if you want to call it that, just kind of getting rid of those. So stick around and we'll go ahead and kind of make some final edits to our gentleman here in the next lesson. We'll see you then. I just want to go ahead and move around the entire face now, just making overall edits using a variety of our healing tools that we've used in this course. I've kind of saved the mouth for the very end. If we zoom in here, you can see that his lips are chapped, very dry, just kind of crusty in some areas. So let's go ahead and clean that up. We'll start by using the healing brush tool, and let's go ahead and make a new layer for that. Okay. And so just as I've done before, just using the healing brush tool, just kind of moving around, sampling as close as I can, and just kind of cleaning up some of these different areas. Now there's some areas where I might end up using the clone stamp tool just to get the kind of the look that I want here. We're just kind of spending a little bit of time. You can see when we get to those edges, it can kind of be a little bit troublesome. We'll probably use the clone stamp on some of those. Now I don't need the lips to be absolutely perfect and pristine. It's fine to have a little bit of imperfection there so that they look natural, but just kind of cleaning it up overall, getting rid of a lot of just the dryness to it that we see. Kind of moving around the upper lip. And I might do another pass on the upper lip here in a moment, with the clone stamp tool, just to kind of get it looking really the way that I want. So let's go ahead and switch to the clone stamp. I'm going to use hard round brush, in this case, transfer. And just kind of bring in over some of those more kind of cleaner areas to different parts of the lips there. And again, having that transfer enabled, I can just lightly apply pressure in different areas to kind of clean up the lips. But already, you can see just how much we've done just in around 2 minutes there. And I'm kind of being mindful of the upper lip. I'm not trying to kill the texture that I have there. I'm just kind of sampling from some different areas that I think look nice and just kind of bringing that over the areas that look a little bit dry. Pretty much the same stuff that we've done in this course, just with the skin, I'm doing now with the lips. All right, but that's feeling worlds better. We'll do a little bit more here. Again, zooming out, kind of making that comparison. That feels really nice. So kind of continuing to move around here using some of our different spot healing tools. I'll kind of, or just healing tools, I'll kind of move around the image now, just kind of examining different areas that I feel could be much improved. even still, having done work to, you know, the skin, stuff like that, I still kind of see a few little areas where I could just kind of manually kind of refine it just to the way that I want. And along the way, just kind of still kind of examining, making comparisons as we go. Okay. That's feeling pretty nice. Just kind of moving around here. Kind of been cleaning up that nose a little bit. Just kind of overall. Kind of moving up here. I kind of see some indiscrepancies that I've been kind of wanting to tackle for a while up here, just as far as the quality of the skin. Now this area up here it's kind of slightly out of focus, but it still draws my attention there. But I'm just kind of sampling, kind of moving around. Might even use the clone stamp tool. Might switch to a soft round brush. And just kind of continue on there. Kind of cleaning up some of that information. I kind of feel like that area up there too is just a tad bit dark. So just kind of cloning in some of that lighter skin right there, I think helps out. Just felt a little dark to me. And again, just kind of lightly applying pressure. I find that retouching a face, by the way, if you can use a stylus instead of a mouse, I think you'll end up with better results. I just feel like I have just more control over what it is I'm doing. Again, just kind of making some visual comparisons. I'm just kind of moving around, just looking for any kind of elements that I just want to kind of tweak. But again, don't go too crazy with it at this point. I mean, we're so close that you don't want to make the face look perfectly pristine. You want to have kind of a natural quality. One thing I would like to address, just kind of coming back to the eyes here, I feel like he's got a little bit of red around the eyes. So just very lightly, again, making use of that pressure sensitivity of my stylus using the clone stamp tool, kind of pulling in some of that lighter value, lighter color onto the eyes there, kind of reducing the redness around the eyes just slightly. That feels pretty nice. And then even coming down here, I kind of see this area right here. Again, this was kind of what we had just from the very beginning. You can kind of see it's kind of blurred right there, just with the original photo. I kind of want to clean it up though. Again, I'm not too happy that the nose was kind of blurred out to the degree that it is. Again, there was kind of appears to be kind of a shallow depth of field when the image was taken. But I'm kind of just cleaning up that area just a little bit. Just kind of bringing up some more of that. It just kind of seemed a little bit weird. I kind of feel like if we bring some more of that facial hair up in there, that might kind of help the nose appear less fuzzy right in that area. I think that's what's kind of bugging me. So just kind of having a more of a defined contrast right there, I think helps, definitely. All right, so let's go ahead and do one final comparison. I'll just collapse our retouching group. And you can see we've come a long way, peeling back the years. It's still the same guy, still very apparent that it's the same gentleman, but we've peeled away probably 15 years. He just looks younger and healthier. I'd say he looks like a guy that's probably late 30s, 36, 37, getting close to 40. So thanks for watching this course. This has been a blast. I've had so much fun working on this. Now, obviously, you probably wouldn't take an image to this degree, this far as we've gone here. Again, you want to think about the client's needs. You may only want to go back a couple of years, just kind of shaving away a few little unflattering aspects of their face. But we wanted to kind of show you how far you could go and just what all you could achieve, kind of wrapping it all around one project here. So hopefully you'll be able to take different aspects of what we've done and apply it to your own projects. And again, as I mentioned right at the beginning of the course, think about kind of that threshold. You wouldn't want to go too far with it. You wouldn't want to try and make this guy look like he's, a teenager again. So do think about that as well. But once again, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in another course.